Welcome back. Today is about the 8th lesson of project management, scheduling resources and costs. There are always more project proposals than there are available resources. The priority system needs to select projects that best contribute to organization's objectives within the constraints of the resource available. If all projects that the respective resources are computer scheduled, the feasibility and impact of adding a new project to those in process can be quite quick assessed. With this information, the project priority team will add a new project only if resources are available to be formally committed to that specific project. This chapter examines methods of scheduling resources so the team can make a realistic judgment of resource availability and project durations. The project manager uses the same schedule for implementing the project. If changes occur during project implementation, the computer schedule is easily updated and the effects easily assessed. Here are the course map. We're approaching the midpoint of this course, marking a key stage in your study. The learning objectives has quite a lot of specific issues, including understanding the differences between time constraint and resource constraint schedules, identify different types of resource constraints, and also understanding how project management software creates resource constraint schedules, and identify some general guidelines for assigning people to specific tasks. And finally, create a time-phased project budget baseline. This one shows the chapter outline, including 10 topics, from overview of the project planning, resource scheduling problems, to using the resource schedule to develop a project cost baseline. After staff and other resources were assigned to her project, a project manager listed the following questions that still need to be addressed. Will the assigned labor and all equipment be adequate and available to deal with my project? Will outside contractors have to be used? Do unforeseen resource dependencies exist? How much flexibility do we have in using resources? Any project scheduling should facilitate finding quick, easy answers to many of these questions. Project planning we have studied in previous studies. We know after the project charter is approved, the project initiation phase is complete and you're ready to proceed to the project planning phase. When the project planning phase is complete, you're ready to proceed to project implementation. Project planning is the second major project phase and the second of the 5 process groups identified in PMBOK. The purposes of the project planning phase are to establishing business requirements, establishing cost schedule, list of deliverables, and delivery dates, as well as establishing resource plan and getting management approval and proceeding to the next phase. Some basic processes of project planning including scope planning, preparing the work breakdown structure, WBS, schedule development, resource planning, budget planning, procurement planning, risk management, quality planning, communication planning, as well as stakeholder management planning. Scope planning, determining the scope, which is a key piece of being able to prepare a plan. It answers questions including what is in, what is out, how long will each task on the WBS take, what are the relationships between the tasks, and so on. Resource planning answers questions regarding what resources are required to carry out each task on the WBS. These resources could include human, budget, specialized equipment, time, technology, and so on. Budget planning answers questions are, what is the required budget? When during the project will the amounts be needed? Is an external source of funding required? Procurement planning will answer those questions. Will equipment or supplies be purchased from another organization or produced within in order to carry out this project? Quality planning. What is the required quality? What are the management of quality implementing? How will it be measured and monitored? Communication planning answers questions including what kinds of communication will be required throughout the project, within the team, with other stakeholders, what forms of communication will be used, formal, informal, written, or oral, and what is the planned frequency of the communication. Next one, stakeholder management planning. The project initiation phase identified the stakeholders. During the planning phase, additional stakeholders may be identified. Detailed plans are made about the format and frequency of communications with each stakeholder groups. Tools are identified which can be used to track and control the relationships between the stakeholders and the project. And risk management. It answers questions what can you anticipate in the way of unknowns that might impact the project? Can you eliminate or mitigate the impacts of these risks, and how? In summary, project planning phase includes scope planning, WBS, project schedule development, resource planning, budget planning, procurement planning, risk management, quality planning, communication planning, and stakeholder management planning. When the project plan is approved by the sponsors, you are ready to proceed to implementation. So now we move into the resource scheduling scope. Resource and the priorities. Project network times are not scheduled until resources have been assigned. There are always more project proposals than are always resources. The project priority team will add a new project only if resources are available. And cost estimates are very important as well. They're not a budget until they have been time-phased. Once resource assignments have been finalized, project teams are ready to develop a baseline budget schedule for the project. Clearly, this project manager has a good understanding of the problems she's facing. Any project scheduling system should facilitate finding quick, easy answers to many of these project planning-related questions. The planned network and activity project duration times found in previous lessons fail to deal with resource usage and availability. The time estimates for the work packages and the network times were made independently with the implicit assumption that resources would be available. This may or may not be the case. If resources are adequate, but the demand varies widely over the life of the project, it may be desirable to even out resource demand by delaying non-critical activities to lower peak demand and thus increase resource utilization. This process is called resource smoothing. On the other hand, if resources are not adequate to meet peak demands, the late start of some activities must be delayed, and the duration of the project may be increased. This process is called resource-constrained scheduling. One research study of more than 50 projects by Woodworth and Wiley found that planned project network durations were increased 68% when resources were scheduled. The consequences of failing to schedule limited resources are costly, and project delays usually manifest themselves midway in the project, when quick correct action is difficult. An additional consequence of failing to schedule resources is ignoring the peaks and valleys of resource usage over the duration of the project. Because project resources are usually overcommitted, and because resources seldom line up by availability and need, procedures are needed to deal with these problems. So this lesson will deal with those issues and address methods available to project managers for dealing with resource utilization and availability through resource leveling and resource-constrained scheduling. Resource constraints have many types. Technical or logical constraints are one major type. There are also resource and time constraints. Technical or logical constraints relate to network sequence in which project activities must occur. Resource constraints refers to the absence or shortage or unique relationship between interaction characteristic of resources that require a particular sequencing of project activities. A resource-constrained project is one that assumes the level of resources available cannot be exceeded. If the resources are inadequate, it will be acceptable to delay the project for as little as possible. This figure shows two types of constraints. In Figure A, up to now, the start and the sequence of activities have been based solely on technical or logical considerations. For example, a project network for framing a house might show three activities in a sequence: pour foundation, build frame, and cover roof. A network of a new software project could place the activities in the network as a consequence of 1. Design, 2. Code, and 3. Test. In other words, you cannot logically perform activity 2 until 1 is completed, and so on. The project network depicts technical constraints. The network assumes the personnel and equipment are available to perform the required work. This is often not the case. For example, assume you are planning a wedding reception that includes 4 activities: plan, hairband, decorate hall, and purchase refreshments. Each activity takes 1 day. Activities 2, 3, and 4 could be done in parallel by different people. There is no technical reason or dependency of one on another, such as B in the figure. However, if one person must perform all activities, the resource constraint requires the activities be performed in sequence or series. Clearly, the consequence is a delay of these activities and a very different set of network relationships. This is shown in Figure C. The interrelationships and the interactions among time and resource constraints are complex for even small projects. Some effort to examine these interactions before the project begins frequently uncovers surprising problems. Project managers who do not consider resource availability in moderately complex projects usually learn of the problem when it is too late to correct. A deficit of resources can significantly alter project dependency relationships, completion dates, and project cost. Project managers must be careful to schedule resources to ensure availability in the right quantity and at the right time. Fortunately, there are computer software programs that can identify resource problems now during the early project planning stage, when corrective changes can be considered. This program only requires activity resource needs and availability information to schedule resources. Resource allocation is an important part of any project management processes, but it can be difficult to do well. From managing budget constraints to making sure your resources are used as efficiently as possible, there are many common problems that come up during project management resource allocation. 4 common issues with resource allocation include not having a clear project scope, having unclear or low staff utilization, lack of resources, and lack of project visibility and centralized data. Assumptions ease of demonstrating the allocation methods available requires some limiting assumptions to keep attention on the heart of the problem. The rest of the lesson depends on this assumption. First, splitting activities will not be allowed. This means once an activity is placed in the schedule, assume it will be worked on continuously until it is finished. Hence, an activity cannot be started, stopped for a period of time, and then finished. Second, the level of resources used for an activity cannot be changed. These limiting assumptions do not exist in practice, but simplify learning. It is easy for new project managers to deal with the reality of splitting activities and changing the level of resources when they meet them on the job. Scheduling time-constrained project focuses on resource utilization. When demand for a specific resource type is erratic, it is difficult to manage and utilization may be very poor. Practitioners have attacked the utilization plan and the problem using resource leveling techniques that balance demand for resource. Basically, all leveling techniques delay non-critical activities by using positive slack to reduce peak demand and fill in the valleys for the resources. An example will demonstrate the basic effect of using this approach. Time-constrained projects must be completed by an imposed date, require the use of leveling techniques, need to focusing on balancing and smoothing resource demands by using positive slack. Another aspects of this technique involve goals of smoothing resource demand. This will help to reduce the peak of demand for the resource, as well as reduce the number of resources over the life of the project and minimize the fluctuation in resource demand. Some of the techniques can be seen used in travel and tourism industry when peak season and off-peak season resource allocation need to be balanced. Downside of smoothing resource demand include loss of flexibility that occurs from reducing slack, and also it can create more critical activities or near critical activities because of slack reduction. Resource demand leveling techniques also have different pros and cons. The advantages are peak resource demands are reduced, resources over the life of the project are reduced, fluctuation in resource demand is minimized. On the other hand, disadvantages include loss of flexibility and increase in the criticality of all activities. This figure shows an example of resource constraints allocation in botanical garden. For the purposes of demonstration, the botanical garden project uses only one resource, bag holes. All bag holes are interchangeable. The top bar chart shows the activities on a time scale. The dependencies are shown with the vertical connecting arrows. The horizontal arrows following activities represent activity slack. For example, irrigation requires 6 days to complete and has 6 days slack. The number of bag holes needed for each task is shown in the shaded activities. After the land has been sacrificed and the plan laid out, work can begin on the workways, irrigation, and fencing and restraining walls simultaneously. The middle chart shows the resource profile for the bag holes. For period 4 through 10, 4 bag holes are needed. Because this project is declared time constrained, the goal will be to reduce the peak resource and thereby increase the utilization of the resource. The botanical garden project schedule reached the 3 goals of smoothing. First, the peak of demand for the resource was reduced. Second, resources over the life of the project have been reduced. Third, the fluctuation in resources demand were minimized. The latter improves the utilization of resource. Backhauls are not easily moved from location to location. There are costs associated with changing the level of resources needed. The same analogy applies to the movement of the people back and forth among projects, like I mentioned in a theme park situation. It is well known that people are more efficient if they can focus their effort on one project rather than multitasking their time among, say, many projects. Projects that involve resources that are limited in quantity or by their ability. These activities are scheduled using heuristics, means rules of thumb method, that focuses on solving three problems: minimum slack, smallest duration, and lowest activity identification number. When the number of people or equipment is not adequate to meet peak demand requirements, and it is impossible to obtain more, the project manager faces a resource-constraint problem. Something has to give. The trick is to prioritize and allocate resource to minimize project delay without exceeding the resource limit or altering the technical network relationships. A few researchers have demonstrated optimal mathematical solutions to the resource allocation problem, but only for small network and very few resource types. The massive data requirements for larger problems make sure mathematical solutions such as linear programming impractical. An alternative approach to the problems has been the use of a heuristics rule of thumb method to solve large combinatorial problems. These priority rules have been in place for many years. Heuristics do not always yield an optimal schedule, but they are very capable of yielding a good schedule for very complex networks with many types of resources. The efficiency of different rules and combinations of rules has been well documented. However, because each project is unique, it is wise to test several sets of heuristics on a network to determine the priority allocation rules that minimize project delay. This figure shows how the allocation of resources, like people, equipment, or materials, impacts the scheduling of tasks when resource availability is limited. The table breaks down the number of resources required at a different period. The horizontal rows are periods in the project, and each row indicates how many resources are needed for each task during that period. Resource-constrained schedule through period 5 to 6 on the right. This shows how the project schedule gets constrained due to resource limitations. For each task, i.e. each row, you can see the time period over which the task occurs, marked by the blue bars, shaded cells. Resource available line at the bottom shows how many resources are available at each period. The diagram illustrates how a project schedule changes when resource availability is considered. Some tasks that could theoretically be done sooner, as shown in the network diagram, are delayed because there aren't enough resources to handle them all at once. Fortunately, project management software is capable of assessing and resolving complicated resource-constrained scheduling using heuristics similar to what was described above. We will look into the EMR project, which demonstrates how this is done using the project. It is important to note that the software is not managing the project. The software is simply a tool the project manager uses to view the project from different perspectives and conditions. See the snapshot from practice that in the figure above. EMR is the name given to the development of a handheld electronic medical reference guide to be used by emergency medical technicians and paramedics. The time limited network for the design phase of the project is shown here. For the purpose of the example, we assume that only design engineers are required for the tasks and that the design engineers are interchangeable. The number of engineers required to perform each task is noted in the network, where 500% means 5 design engineers are needed for the activity. For example, activity 5 features specs requires 4 design engineers. That means 4,000%. The image shows a network view of a schedule before resources are leveled for an EMR project. This is a representation of the tasks, their dependency, start and finish date, duration, and the resource assigned. Key points are tasks and the dependency. Each box represents a task in the project. The arrow between boxes shows the dependency, indicating that certain tasks must be completed before others can begin. Task details. Each box shows the task's start date, finish date, duration, and the resource assigned. This could have architectural decision or voice recognition (SW). The resources are the resource percentage, indicate how much of a particular resource is allocated to a task. The resources are not yet leveled, meaning multiple tasks may be over-allocated with the same resources, which would cause a bottleneck in the real project timeline. Unleveled schedule. Since the resources are not leveled, some tasks may have overlapping timeframes and require more resources than available. This is usually addressed in the resource leveling process, which adjusts start and finish date to ensure resource availability is balanced across tasks. The chart is designed to illustrate how the project schedule looks before resource leveling is applied, and it virtually demonstrates the sequence of tasks and their resource demands. This bar chart incorporates the same information used to develop the project network, but presents the project in the form of a bar chart along a timeline. Finally, a resource usage chart is presented for a segment of the project, January 15th to January 23rd. Observe that the time-limited project requires 21 design engineers on January 18th to 19th. This segment represents the peak requirement for design engineers for the project. However, due to the shortage of design engineers and commitment to other projects, only 8 engineers can be assigned to the project. This creates over-allocation problems, more clearly detailed in this figure, which is a resource loading chart for design engineers. Notice that the peak is 21 engineers, and the limit of 8 engineers is shown by the gray shaded area. To resolve this problem, we use the leveling tool within the software and first try to solve the problem by leveling only within Slack. This solution would preserve the original finish date. Hehowever, as expected, this does not solve all of the allocation problems. The next option is to allow the software to apply scheduling heuristics and level outside of Slack. The new schedule is contained in the revised resource limit network chart presented in next figure. The resource-limited project network indicates the project duration has now been extended to February 26, which is 57 workdays, versus 40 days time frame. This figure presents the project bar chart and the results of leveling the project schedule to reflect the availability of only 8 design engineers. The application of the heuristics can be seen in the scheduling of the internal, external, and feature specification activities. All 3 activities were originally scheduled to start immediately after Activity 1. Architectural decisions. This is impossible since the 3 activities collectively require 14 engineers. The software chooses to schedule activity 5 first because the activity is on the original critical path and has 0 slack, which is the heuristic rule 1. Next, and concurrently, activity 4 is chosen over activity 3 because activity 4 has a shorter duration. Heuristic rule 2. Internal specs, activity 3 is delayed due to the limitation of 8 design engineers. Notice that the original critical path no longer applies because of the resource dependency created by having only 8 design engineers. Like leveling schedules, the limited resource schedule usually reduces slack flexibility by using slack to ensure delay is minimized and increases the number of critical and near-critical activities. Scheduling complexity is increased because resource constraints are added to technical constraints. Start time may now have 2 constraints. The traditional critical path concept of sequential activities from the start to the end of the project is no longer meaningful. The resource constraints can break the sequence and leave the network with a set of disjointed critical activities. Conversely, parallel activities can become sequential. Activities with slack on a time-constrained network can change from critical to non-critical. Splitting tasks is a scheduling technique used to get a better project schedule and to increase resource utilization. A planner splits the continuous work included in an activity by interrupting the work and sending the resource to another activity for a period of time, and then having the resource resume work on the original activity. Splitting can be a useful tool if the work involved does not include large startup or shutdown costs. For example, moving equipment from one activity location to another. The most common error is to interrupt people work where there are high conceptual startup and shutdown costs. For example, having a bridge designer take time off to work on the design problem of another project will cause this individual to lose a full day shifting conceptual gears in and out of 2 activities. The cost may be hidden, but it is real. This figure depicts the nature of the splitting problem. The original activity has been split into 3 separate activities, A, B, and C. The shutdown and startup time lessen the time for the original activities. When making individual assignments, project managers should match as best they can the demands and requirements of a specific work with the qualifications and experience of available participants. In doing so, there is a natural tendency to assign the best people the most difficult task. Project managers need to be careful not to overdo this. Over time, these people may grow to resent the fact that they're always given the toughest assignments. At the same time, less experienced participants may resent either the fact that they are not given the opportunity to expand their skill and knowledge base. Project managers need to balance task performance with the need to develop the talents of people assigned to the task. Project managers not only need to decide who does what, but who works with whom. A number of factors need to be considered in deciding who should work together. First, to minimize unnecessary tension, managers should pick people with compatible work habits and personality, but who complement each other, such as one person's weakness is the other person's strength. Key resource allocation issues are discussed above. In reality, resource allocation generally occurs in a multi-project environment, where the demands of one project have to be reconciled with the need of other projects. Organizations must develop and manage a system for efficiently allocating and scheduling resources across several projects with different priorities, resource requirements, set of activities, and risks. The system must be dynamic and capable of accommodating new projects as well as reallocating resources once project work is completed, while the same resource issues and principles that apply to single project also apply to multi-project environment. Application and solutions are more complex, given the interdependency among the projects. To deal with these problems, more and more companies create project offices or departments to oversee the scheduling of resources across multiple projects. One approach to multiple project resource scheduling is to use a first-come, first-served rule. A project queue system is created in which projects currently underway take precedence over new projects. Many companies utilize more elaborate processes for scheduling resources to increase the capacity of the organization to initiate projects. Most of these methods approach the problems by treating individual projects as part of one big project and adapting the scheduling heuristics previously introduced to the mega project. Finally, many companies are using outsourcing as a means for dealing with the resource allocation constraints. In some cases, a company will reduce the number of projects they have to manage internally, only cope with projects and outsources non-critical projects to contractors and consulting firms. Companies may hire temporary workers to expedite certain activities that are falling behind schedule or contract project work during peak period when there are insufficient internal resources to meet the demand of all the projects. The ability to more efficiently manage the ebbs and flows of project work is one of the major driving forces behind outsourcing today. Once resource assignments have been finalized, we are able to develop a baseline budget schedule for the project. Using the project schedule, we can use time phase work package and assign them to their respective scheduled activities to develop a budget over the life of our project. Understanding the reason for time phasing the budget is very important. Without a time-phased budget, good project schedule and cost control are impossible. This is a figure showing the PC prototype project, arranged by deliverables and organization unit responsible. For each intersections, the WBS or OBS matrix, you see work package budgets and the total cost. The total cost at each intersection is called a cost or control account. The WBS provides the information you can use to time-phase work packages and assign them to their respective scheduled activities over the life of the project. This figure shows the work package has a duration of 3 weeks. Assuming labor, material, and equipment are tracked separately, the work package cost for labor are distributed over the 3 weeks as they are expected to occur. Respectively, when the 3-week work package is placed in the network schedule, the costs are distributed to the time-phased budget for the same 3 scheduled weeks. Fortunately, most single WPS become an activity and the process of distinguish cost is relatively simple. That is, the relationship is 1-for-1, such budget timing as directly from the work package to the activity. In a few instances, an activity will include more than one work package, where the package assigned to one responsible person or team and deliverable. In this case, the work package are consolidated into one activity, as seen in this figure, which includes 2 WPS. The first WPS is distributed over the first 3 weeks. These are 113241 code. The second 113242 is sequenced over weeks 3 and 4. The activity duration is 4 weeks. When the activity is placed in the schedule, the costs are distributed starting with the schedule start, 20,000, 15,000, 75,000, and 70,000 respectively. Project management is all about being on time and within budget for successful project delivery, but that is often easier said than done. A key strategy to optimizing success is having an effective process for project management resource allocation, which can provide the following benefits. Help projects get delivered on time, lowers project risk, ensures the right resources are available at the right time, boosts employee engagement, increases productivity, reduce cost, keep budgets on track, keep on reading to discover common resource allocation problems that you might already be dealing with, and how to solve those issues to optimize delivery success and client satisfaction. Resource usage and availability are key challenges for project managers. And addressing these issues during project schedule can help identify bottleneck before the project starts. These are what we summarized in this lesson. So ignoring resource scheduling can lead to significant deviations from standard CPM results. With the rapid pace of technological and time-to-market pressures, identifying resource issues early can avoid costly project delay and consequent problems. Resource deviation during the project should be tracked and updated in real time. A multi-project, multi-source system helps align resource allocation with organizational goal. The resource schedule is crucial as it forms the baseline for tracking time and developing the time-phased project cost budget. Without time-phased costs, measuring performance is unreliable. Here we have some key terms that we have studied today, including heuristics, leveling, smoothing, PV, planned value, resource-constrained project, resource-constrained scheduling, resource smoothing, splitting, time-constrained project, time-phased budget baseline. Here are some review questions that can be used in a class situation or being given to students to do some written exercises. So some quite thought-provoking, for example, why is it critical to develop a time-phased baseline, and how does resource scheduling tie to project priority? Exercises, I suggested this one, which is also included in the textbook. Given this table, ask students to give the time-phased work package, complete the baseline budget form for this project. Reading is called textbook reading, which is the chapter 8 of this book. There is also a link pointing to the quizzes that students can do for some of the topics of this chapter. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Please don't forget to subscribe so you can get more lessons to come. 未来的 New Balance，we are go。